Welcome listeners to a factual exploration of the most terrifying military force in the post-nuclear wasteland. Today, we examine Caesar's legion's actual military organization, the structure, ranks, and systematic tribal annihilation that transformed one man's vision into an empire. By 2281, Caesar had conquered 87 tribes, erasing their identities so completely that even their names were forbidden. Children torn from parents at age 5, boys trained to die without hesitation, girls raised as breeding stock, an 8-man squad structure refined through genocide, decimation punishments where legionaries beat their own brothers to death, and behind it all, a dying dictator racing to transform a nomadic war machine into permanent empire before his brain tumor killed him. This is the true horror of Caesar's legion, not fiction, but the documented nightmare of Fallout's most brutal faction. And if you genuinely enjoy these factual explorations of the post-apocalyptic wasteland, consider subscribing and liking the channel, but only if you like the content. The Arizona sun beat down on Fortification Hill as 8 recruits stood in a perfect line, their crude machetes trembling in sweating palms. Before them, Decanus Martius paced like a radwolf circling wounded prey. These boys, none older than 16, had been Blackfoot children 3 months ago. Now their tribal names were ash, scattered across a wasteland that swallowed identity as readily as it swallowed hope. "Contubernium!" Martius barked, his voice cracking like a whip across sun-baked stone. 8 men, 1 tent, 1 purpose, Mars demands sacrifice, and you 8 will bleed together or die separately. The smallest recruit, barely 14, shifted his weight. Martius was on him instantly, fist slamming into the boy's solar plexus. The recruit crumpled, gasping, as his 7 brothers watched without expression. They'd learned that lesson in their first week. Emotion was weakness, and weakness earned crucifixion. "Your contubernium is the smallest sacred unit in Caesar's machine," Martius continued, stepping over the gasping boy. 8 contubernia form a centuria, 80 men commanded by a centurion. 6 centuria become a cohort, 480 soldiers who move as one organism, primes in the center, veterans in reserve. And you pathetic maggots will form the front line, where Mars separates wheat from chaff. The recruit finally dragged himself upright, blood trickling from his nose. Martius didn't acknowledge him. In Caesar's legion, surviving was not worthy of praise. It was merely the baseline expectation. 20 yards away, in the arena carved from scrap metal and desperation, veteran legionary Titus circled a captured NCR trooper. The prisoner's hands were bound, his rifle arm broken at an unnatural angle from yesterday's decimation. 600 legionaries ringed the pit, watching as Caesar's will manifested in blood and bone. "The NCR sends boys. With guns," Titus announced to the crowd, his voice carrying the flat certainty of scripture. "They think bullets make warriors, but a bullet requires powder, a primer, perfect conditions. Your fist," he drove his armored glove into the trooper's kidney, "requires only will." The prisoner screamed. The legionaries remained silent. This was education, not entertainment. Centurion Cursor watched from the ridge, his armor crafted from the breastplates of 7 fallen enemies. Each piece told a story: NCR Ranger armor from the First Battle of Hoover Dam, Brotherhood of Steel pauldrons from Helios 1, Powderganger scraps from the Nipton Massacre. His very body was a monument to conquest, and his eyes held the cold calculation of a man who'd climbed from recruit to commander over the corpses of his failures. "How many in your centuria this month?" asked veteran centurion Gaius, approaching with the measured gait of legion nobility. 73, Cursor replied without emotion. "Lost 7 in the Nelson raid?" "Acceptable losses. Caesar pushes west again soon. We'll need every contubernium at full strength." Gaius paused, watching the arena where Titus had moved to demonstrating proper crucifixion technique on the now unconscious NCR trooper. "The new recruits from the Twisted Hairs, have they been properly broken?" Cursor's jaw tightened microscopically. The Twisted Hairs had been his mother's people before Caesar erased such concepts. Now they were simply raw material for Mars's furnace. "Their tribal identities are ash. They answer to legion names. They've crucified their own chieftains on Interstate 40. They are legion now." This was Caesar's genius, Cursor reflected bitterly. Total cultural annihilation. Every tribe conquered, 87 now, lost their languages, their traditions, their very names. The Blackfoots, Kaibobs, Ridgers, Fredonians, Hydebarks, all dissolved into the monolithic identity of Caesar's war machine. Children torn from parents at age 5, raised by priestesses who taught that Mars himself dictated every tradition. The boys learned that their highest purpose was to die screaming Caesar's name. The girls learned that their wombs belonged to the state, their bodies assigned to whichever legionary Caesar deemed genetically superior. In Caesar's tent atop the hill, Legate Lanius reviewed reports from the Eastern campaign. The towering figure, 7 feet of scar tissue and calculated brutality, traced a scarred finger across a map of Colorado. 19 tribes crushed in 6 months, 14 assimilated, 5 exterminated entirely when they proved too independent for legion doctrine. "The hide barks are mine," Lanius growled to Vulpes Inculta, who stood in shadow like a knife waiting for a spine. Every male over age 10, Caesar promised. Vulpes, greatest of the Frumentarii, master of infiltration and terror, merely inclined his head. Caesar keeps his promises, though one wonders if such personal attachments serve the legion's greater purpose. Lanius's hand moved to the blade of the east, that massive cleaver that had separated countless heads from necks. "Question my loyalty again, Frumentarii, and Caesar will need a new spy master." "Peace, Legate." Vulpes' smile never touched his eyes. "I merely observed that the Hydebark's delay cost us 3 months. Your personal vendetta was sanctioned by Caesar himself." Lanius's mask, forged iron shaped like bearded Mars, reflected the tense, dim lighting. "When their chieftain surrendered, when those cowards chose slavery over honorable death, I killed 15 of my own brothers for their weakness. Caesar saw value in that rage. He offered me this." Lanius tapped his mask, "and permission to execute every surviving male. The Legion transforms weakness into strength. Those Hydebark children now fight under my command, knowing what happens to cowards." Outside, the training continued. Decanus Martius led his contubernium through combat drills, 8 recruits moving in perfect synchronization, stabbing and parrying against practice dummies stuffed with Brahmin viscera. Each movement had been drilled 10,000 times. Each recruit knew that failure meant decimation, that ancient Roman punishment where every 10th man was beaten to death by his own brothers. "Faster!" Martius screamed. "The NCR won't wait for you to remember which end of the machete cuts. Prime legionaries can run half again as fast as profligate troops, and you maggots aren't even recruits yet." One boy stumbled. Martius was on him instantly, boot to spine, driving him face first into the blood-soaked sand. "Your clumsiness kills your brothers. Remember Nelson? When Centurion Dead Sea led 6 Centuriae against 24 NCR positions? Know why we won?" The recruits answered in unison. "Discipline, sacrifice, the will of Caesar." "Wrong!" Martius drove his boot down harder and something cracked. "We won because Dead Sea executed his own Decanus when the man hesitated. Because when Dead Sea's Centuria broke, Legate Lanius invoked decimatio. 80 men lined up. Every 10th soldier stepped forward. Their own brothers beat them to death with fists and stones. The survivors never hesitated again." The boy beneath Martius's boot whimpered. It was the wrong response. "Take him to the arena," Martius ordered. "Let's see if he can hesitate with Otho's mongrels tearing out his throat." 2 recruits dragged their brother toward the pit, where Legion Houndmasters, remnants of the Hangdogs tribe, whose specialty in dog taming had saved them from complete erasure, waited with their starving pack. The Hangdogs had no tribal identity now. Their only purpose was to breed, train, and deploy the Legion mongrels that hunted deserters and terrified the profligates. In the medical tent, such as it was, Legion Surgeon Cato worked without stim packs, without med-X, without any of the weakness-inducing chems that Caesar had. Banned, he packed a legionary's shattered leg with healing powder, a bitter mixture of cave fungus and local herbs that the twisted hairs had perfected over generations. The legionary screamed. Cato ignored him. Pain built resistance. Those who survived surgery were strong enough to fight again. Those who didn't, Mars had judged them unworthy. "Bite down," Cato ordered, forcing a leather strap between the legionary's teeth. Then he began resetting the bone without ceremony, without mercy. The soldiers' shrieks echoed across Fortification Hill, mixing with the arena's sounds and the eternal drilling of fresh recruits. This was Caesar's Legion, a machine that consumed tribes and excreted soldiers. 87 tribal identities ground to dust, thousands of children torn from parents, tens of thousands enslaved, and at every level, from the 8-man contubernium to the 480-soldier cohort, the same iron discipline, the same ruthless efficiency, the same certainty that weakness deserved only death. Vexillarius Picus stood on the western ridge, holding high the legion's standard, that red banner emblazoned with a golden bull. His armor was superior to standard legionary gear, his helmet distinctive with its dog skull crest, his rifle a privilege earned through demonstrated courage. As standard bearer, he was the rallying point, the symbol that legionaries surged toward when battle turned to chaos. He also had the honor of being first to die in most engagements, as every NCR sniper knew to target the banner. Picus had held this position for 8 months. The previous Vexillarius had lasted 3. Below him, Vulpes Inculta emerged from Caesar's tent and began his descent toward Cottonwood Cove. The Frumentari's mission was already planned: infiltrate the strip disguised as a courier, assess Mr. House's defenses, identify potential allies among the Omertas. It was patient work, requiring guile and deception, everything that Legate Lanius despised and everything that Caesar valued. Vulpes had earned his position through tactical brilliance. As a young Decanus, he'd broken ranks during a battle with an insignificant tribe, led his 8-man contubernium through a gap in enemy defenses, and captured the chieftain. His centurion wanted him crucified for disobedience. Caesar instead promoted him to Frumentarii, recognizing that intelligence and initiative, properly channeled, served the legion better than mindless obedience. Now Vulpes commanded all of Caesar's intelligence operations. The destruction of Camp Searchlight, radiation barrels smuggled into NCR barracks, turning a garrison into a ghoul-infested tomb. The Nipton massacre, where he'd convinced the mayor to betray his own citizens, then taught the entire town what happened to profligates through lottery and crucifixion. Every major legion victory in the Mojave bore Vulpes' subtle fingerprints, yet even Vulpes answered to the simple military hierarchy. 8 men to a contubernium, 80 to a centuria, 480 to a cohort, and approximately 5,000 combat-ready legionaries preparing to cross the Colorado, with support personnel bringing total legion strength to perhaps 12,000 souls under direct military control. Not counted in those numbers were the hundreds of thousands of civilians in Legion territory. Those who lived in Arizona's shattered cities, New Mexico's trading posts, Colorado's frontier settlements. These people weren't Legion. They were subjects, paying tribute, staying quiet, grateful that Caesar's ruthless pacification meant no raiders, no fiends, no chaos, just absolute order purchased with absolute brutality. If you're engaged with this account so far, hit that like and subscribe button. Back in the training yard, Decanus Martius watched the mongrels tear into the hesitant recruit. The boy's screams lasted 7 minutes before blood loss brought silence. Martius turned to the remaining 7 members of the contubernium. "Your brother was weak," he announced flatly. "Houndmaster Corvus, assign these 7 a new 8th. Training continues in 1 hour. Dismissed." The recruits dispersed, not one showing emotion at their tentmate's death. They'd been properly broken. Their tribal identities, whatever those had been, no longer existed. They were implements of war now, components in Caesar's machine, and Mars cared nothing for their individual fates. On the horizon, the sun began its descent toward California. Somewhere west, the NCR prepared defenses at Hoover Dam. Somewhere in the Mojave, profligates lived in their corrupt democracy, weak and undisciplined, and soon to be crushed. But here, atop Fortification Hill, the Legion continued its eternal work, breaking boys into soldiers, transforming tribes into instruments, and preparing to paint the Colorado River red with the blood of civilization's last stand against Caesar's inevitable conquest. In his throne room, Caesar himself sat studying reports, his brain tumor, unknown to all but his personal physician, sending spikes of agony through his skull. But pain was temporary. The Legion was eternal, and soon, very soon, New Vegas would become his Rome, and the transformation from nomadic war machine to permanent empire would be complete. The machinery of Mars ground forward, unstoppable and merciless, built on a foundation of erased identities and perfect, terrible discipline. 3 weeks after the training yard execution, Decanus Martius received new orders from Centurion Dead Sea. Take his contubernium 50 miles north to a settlement called Bitter Springs and observe NCR refugee movements. It was reconnaissance work, the kind that got Decani promoted to Centurion or nailed to crosses, depending on results. The 7 surviving recruits and their replacement 8th, a twisted hair's boy named Marcus before Caesar renamed him Quintus, moved through the Mojave night like shadows. They'd learned to run at speeds that left NCR troopers gasping, covering ground with an efficiency that would have impressed their tribal ancestors. Except none of them remembered those ancestors anymore. The priestesses had taught them that history began with Caesar, that the world before Mars spoke to Edward Sallow was darkness and chaos. Quintus stumbled on loose rock. Martius's fist caught him across the jaw before the sound finished echoing. "Silent," the Decanus hissed. "NCR Rangers patrol these ridges. They won't hesitate. They won't capture. They'll put a bullet through your skull from 400 yards and never lose sleep." The contubernium pressed forward. Behind them, the Legion was mobilizing for something massive. Though recruits weren't privileged with strategic knowledge, Martius knew slightly more. Legate Lanius had returned from the east, his campaign of 19 conquered tribes complete. The monster of the east now turned his attention westward, toward Hoover Dam, toward the final confrontation that would transform the Legion from nomadic army into permanent empire. But first, intelligence. Always intelligence. Which was why Vulpes Inculta's Frumentarii operated across the Colorado, gathering information that regular legionaries would never obtain through simple brutality. 400 miles south, in a new California town called Nipton, Vulpes stood in the mayor's office and smiled. Mayor Joseph Stein, a rather intense young man according to his own journal, had just agreed to a simple transaction. For a modest payment in Legion currency, he would lure a powder-ganger contingent and several NCR troopers into town, then signal the Legion when both groups had settled in. "You understand," Vulpes said softly, adjusting his vexillarius helmet with its distinctive dog skull. "This arrangement benefits everyone. The powder gangers receive justice. The NCR learns respect. Nipton receives compensation." Stein's hands shook as he counted the aureus coins. He didn't yet understand that Vulpes had no intention of paying anyone. The town was already dead. Stein simply hadn't realized he'd sold not just his enemies, but his entire community. Within 48 hours, Nipton would become an object lesson in what happened to profligates who served all masters equally. Vulpes had already positioned 20 Frumentarii in the surrounding hills. When the trap sprang, every resident would face the lottery: enslavement, crucifixion, or, for the very lucky few, release to spread terror among their fellow profligates. This was Frumentarii work, not the brutal frontal assaults that Lanius preferred, but psychological warfare designed to destroy morale before the main Legion forces ever arrived. Camp Searchlight had been Vulpes' masterpiece, radiation barrels smuggled into NCR barracks by paid collaborators, turning an entire garrison into feral ghouls overnight. The NCR still didn't understand how it had happened. They suspected, they investigated. But proving that the Legion had infiltrated their supply chains, their trusted merchants, their very infrastructure? Impossible. Vulpes left Nipton with Mayor Stein, still counting coins, still believing he'd made a profitable arrangement. The Frumentarii commander mounted his Brahmin, an undignified beast, but effective for covering distance, and began the journey back to Fortification Hill. Caesar would want a full report on the Nipton operation, on the Omerta's negotiations, on the mole they'd placed at Camp McCarran after 3 years of meticulous preparation. The ride gave Vulpes time to think about the Legion's structure, the elegant brutality of its organization. He himself had risen from Decanus to Frumentarii through tactical brilliance and through Caesar's willingness to value results over rigid obedience. The centurion who'd wanted him crucified for breaking ranks had died badly during the First Battle of Hoover Dam, his failure punished by decimation when Legate Lanius invoked that ancient Roman discipline. Vulpes had watched that decimation, 80 men lined in ranks, every 10th soldier stepping forward, then the beating, fists, rocks, improvised clubs, as 9/10 of a centuria murdered 1/10 of their brothers to instill robust obedience, as Caesar called it. The survivors never questioned orders again. They also developed a particular desperation in combat, knowing that failure meant not just death, but the horror of killing their own comrades first. Back at Fortification Hill, a different kind of selection was underway. In Caesar's tent, surrounded by 4 Praetorian guards and under the watchful gaze of Praetorian Commander Lucius, a veteran centurion named Cursor stood at attention. "You've killed enough men to qualify as centurion 5 times over," Caesar observed, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. The tumor pulsed behind his eyes, but his voice remained steady. "Your tactical acumen at Nelson was exemplary. Dead Sea speaks highly of your leadership. And yet you've never challenged a Praetorian. Why?" Cursor chose his words carefully. "The Praetorian Guard serves you directly, Caesar. To seek that honor requires certainty that one can survive the trial. I would rather serve competently as centurion than fail as a dead Praetorian candidate." Caesar's laugh was dry as desert wind. Honest, but insufficient. Lucius, explain the process. The Praetorian commander stepped forward, his ballistic fist gleaming in the tense lamplight. Lucius was old by legion standards, perhaps 50, and had commanded Caesar's personal guard for 13 years. No challenger had dared face him in 5, not from respect, Cursor suspected, but from survival instinct. Any legionary who's earned centurion rank may be invited to join the Praetorians, Lucius explained, but the invitation is not an appointment. You must choose which current Praetorian you believe is weakest. You challenge him to unarmed combat, no weapons, no armor, to the death. If you win, you take his place. If you lose, Lucius smiled without warmth. Your corpse feeds the mongrels. I'm inviting you now, Caesar said. Choose your opponent. Cursor's mind raced through options. He'd observed the Praetorians for years. Most were veterans of multiple campaigns, bodies scarred from countless battles. Each had survived their own trial, meaning they'd already proven themselves superior to at least one previous Praetorian. The weakest current guard was probably Marcus. But Marcus was still formidable, a veteran of the First Hoover Dam battle who'd personally killed 3 NCR Rangers in close combat. I choose Marcus, Cursor said finally. Caesar nodded. At sunset, the arena. Come prepared to prove your worth to Mars. As Cursor left the tent, he passed the weather monitoring station that concealed Mr. House's secret bunker, unknown to Caesar, unknown to the Legion. The Praetorians guarding that station watched him with predatory interest. They knew what sunset would bring. 4 hours later, 600 legionaries ringed the arena as Cursor and Marcus circled each other in the blood-soaked sand. Both men had stripped to simple tunics, no ballistic fists, no armor, just flesh and bone and the understanding that one of them would die in the next 10 minutes. Marcus struck first, a devastating right hook that would have shattered Cursor's jaw if it had connected. Cursor rolled under it, driving his elbow into Marcus's kidney, following with a knee to the groin that doubled the Praetorian over. The crowd remained silent. This was sacred work, not entertainment. For 7 brutal minutes they fought. Cursor landed 3 ribs-breaking strikes. Marcus crushed Cursor's left hand and fractured his cheekbone. Blood slicked the sand, making footing treacherous. Both men gasped for air in the Arizona heat, their bodies failing even as their wills remained iron. Then, Cursor saw his opening. Marcus's guard dropped for a fraction of a second, exhaustion overcoming discipline. Cursor lunged, got behind the Praetorian, locked his arm around Marcus's throat. The rear naked choke, a technique borrowed from pre-war martial arts manuals that Caesar had studied obsessively. Marcus thrashed, clawed at Cursor's arm, managed to break 2 of Cursor's fingers before oxygen deprivation began shutting down his brain. 10 seconds, 20. Marcus's struggles weakened. 30 seconds. His body went limp. Cursor held the choke for another full minute, making absolutely certain. When he finally released Marcus's corpse, he could barely stand. His left hand was ruined, his face a swollen mass of bruises, his ribs screaming with every breath. Caesar descended into the arena, Lucius at his side. The dictator examined Marcus's body dispassionately, then turned to Cursor. You are Praetorian now. Report to the surgeon, then to Lucius for your ballistic fist and your new duties. Your first assignment begins tomorrow. You'll accompany me to address the cohorts preparing for Hoover Dam. Caesar paused. And Cursor, Praetorians don't fail. The price for incompetence is not decimation. It's not crucifixion. It's burning alive and being thrown into the Grand Canyon, as Legate Graham learned. Remember that. While Cursor received his new armor, crafted from the salvaged gear of fallen enemies, each piece marking a Legion victory, another process unfolded in the slave pens at Cottonwood Cove. Slave Master Canyon Runner examined 3 new captures with a professional eye honed over decades of evaluating human livestock. Boys too old for proper training, he muttered, gesturing at a 12-year-old captured from a Freeside gang. Past 10 years, they've developed independent thought. We can break him for labor, but he'll never be proper Legion. The woman, premenopausal, healthy, good breeding stock, assign her to Centurion Aurelius. He's proven genetically superior, and Caesar wants his bloodline propagated. The third capture, a 5-year-old girl taken during the Nelson raid, would go to the priestesses. She'd be raised in the Legion way, taught that Mars spoke through Caesar, indoctrinated into absolute belief that women existed, to serve as breeding stock for the state's selected males. By age 16, she'd be assigned to whichever legionary Caesar deemed appropriate, and she'd accept this without question because she'd never known any alternative. This was the slave economy that underpinned the Legion's military might. Every conquered tribe provided fresh bodies, Males under 10 became recruits. Males 10 to 15 went to labor camps, building roads and fortifications until they proved useful or died from exhaustion. Females of breeding age were distributed according to genetic profiles. Caesar, or his legates, determined which legionaries deserved reproductive privileges based on combat performance and physical superiority. Older females and males past fighting age worked until they collapsed. The legion had no retirement, no pensions, no care for the weak. Those who couldn't contribute labor died. Quickly, if they were fortunate. Slowly, crucified as examples, if they complained. "These three to the fort," Canyon Runner ordered his assistant. "Caesar's rebuilding strength after the eastern campaigns. He'll want fresh breeding stock for the veterans returning with Lanius." The captures were loaded onto a barge, their bomb collars fitted snugly around their necks. The collars were a concession to practicality. Even the Legion recognized that physical restraints worked better than ideology for freshly enslaved profligates who hadn't yet learned that resistance meant explosive decapitation. If this narrative has kept you listening and you want more factual accounts from the post-apocalyptic wasteland, hit that like button. It really motivates me to create more Fallout content. At Fortification Hill, Legate Lanius stood on the eastern ridge, watching the sun rise over territory he'd personally conquered. 19 tribes, 14 assimilated into the Legion's military machine. 5 exterminated completely when they proved too independent, too resistant, too unwilling to abandon their identities for Caesar's monolithic culture. The Hydebarks had been number 67, Lanius's own tribe, the tribe whose chieftain had chosen surrender over honorable death, driving Lanius into such rage that he'd murdered 15 of his own people before being subdued. Caesar had seen value in that fury, had offered the young warrior an iron mask forged in Mars's image, had given him permission to execute every adult male Hydebark who remained. Lanius had accepted, had personally slit the throat of every man who'd chosen slavery over death, had spared only the young boys, children like he'd once been, to be raised as proper legionaries who would never know the weakness of their fathers. Now those boys fought under his command, perfectly disciplined soldiers who understood viscerally what happened to cowards. The Hydebark women had been scattered throughout the Legion as breeding stock, their tribal identity erased, their wombs claimed for Caesar's genetic experiments in creating the perfect warrior caste. Behind him, Centurion Gaius Magnus approached, his distinctive armor, crafted from the armor of the 20th tribe he'd conquered after Lanius's arrival, gleaming in the morning light. "The cohorts are ready, Legate. 6 centuriae per cohort, 80 men per centuria. We have 11 full cohorts preparing for the Colorado crossing, 5,280 combat-ready legionaries, plus support personnel." Lanius nodded slowly. "And Vulpes' Frumentarii?" Operating independently, as always, he reports success at Nipton, Camp McCarran, and with the Omertas. "When we attack Hoover Dam, the NCR will find their supply lines cut, their intelligence compromised, their allies turned." "Vulpes fights like a coward," Lanius growled. "Deception and infiltration. Where is the honor in sabotage?" "It's effective," Gaius countered carefully. One didn't contradict the monster of the East lightly. "Caesar values results. Vulpes delivers results." Lanius's hand moved to the blade of the East. For a moment, Gaius thought he'd overstepped. Then the legate relaxed fractionally. "Caesar's wisdom exceeds my understanding. But when we cross that river, when we face the bear at Hoover Dam, there will be no deception, only blood and steel and the will of Mars. That is warfare worthy of history." In the medical tent, the newly promoted Praetorian cursor received treatment from Legion surgeon Cato. No stimpaks. Those were profligate crutches that weakened the body's natural healing. No Med-X, pain-built resistance. Instead, healing powder packed into his broken hand, bitter drink forced down his throat to reduce swelling, and Hydra, that hypocritically addictive chem that the Legion used despite banning other drugs to restore mobility to his damaged fingers. "You'll fight again in 3 weeks, Cato announced, examining the hand with clinical detachment. "Praetorians can't show weakness. If Caesar sees you favoring that hand, he'll question your selection. Better to suffer now than burn later." Cursor said nothing. He'd watched Graham burn, or tried to burn. The Malpais legate had been covered in pitch, set aflame by Praetorians just like Cursor was now, and thrown into the Grand Canyon as punishment for losing the first battle of Hoover Dam. Rumors claimed Graham had survived, that the burned man wandered somewhere in Utah, but speaking his name meant execution. Caesar had declared him in damnatio memoriae, condemnation of memory, eternal enemy of the legion. The sun climbed higher. In the training yards, fresh recruits drilled under Decianus' supervision. In the slave pens, new captors learned what happened to those who resisted. Crucifixion along the roads, bodies left to rot as warnings. In Caesar's tent, the dictator planned the greatest military operation in post-apocalyptic history, the conquest of Hoover Dam, New Vegas, and ultimately the entire new California Republic. And everywhere, at every level of the legion's iron hierarchy, the same truth echoed, from the 8-man contubernium to the cohort of 480, from the lowliest recruit to the legate himself. All served Caesar's vision of a world unified under Mars's eternal law. The machinery of conquest ground forward, unstoppable and merciless, fueled by tribal annihilation and perfect, terrible discipline. 53 days before the Second Battle of Hoover Dam, Centurion Alexis stood in his command tent at Cottonwood Cove and examined the armor he'd spent 6 months crafting. Each piece told a story written in blood and metal. The breastplate hewn from NCR Ranger combat armor, taken from Chief Hanlon's men during the Boulder City Massacre, pauldrons fashioned from Brotherhood of Steel plating, salvaged after Helios I fell silent, gauntlets constructed from Enclave remnant technology, scavenged from battlefields most profligates had forgotten existed. This was Centurion privilege, the right to forge personal armor from conquered enemies, to display one's victories across one's own body. Lower ranks wore standardized legion gear, sports equipment welded into crude approximations of lorica segmentata, mass-produced in legion workshops from University of Arizona football padding and scavenged metal plates. But centurions? They were walking monuments to Caesar's doctrine of total war. Alexis lifted his newest acquisition, a thermic lance, its heating element still functional despite 2 centuries of decay. He'd taken it from a dead Brotherhood paladin at Helios I, right before Vulpes' Frumentarii had rigged the solar plant's Archimedes system to incinerate NCR positions. The weapon represented everything Caesar preached. Technology was not inherently weak, but reliance on it was. A centurion could wield advanced weapons because he'd proven his worth with crude machetes first. The gun was a privilege earned through demonstrated mastery of blade and fist. "Centurion," his Decianus interrupted, entering the tent with the rigid posture of a man who knew that informality meant crucifixion. "The profligate settlement 12 miles north, Red Rock Canyon, the great Khans, Frumentarii Vulpes, requests your presence at the negotiation." Alexis secured his armor and departed. The great Khans were a special case, one of the few tribes Caesar hadn't simply crushed and absorbed. They had value as allies, as raiders who could harass NCR supply lines while the Legion prepared its main assault. But Alexis knew the truth that the Khans apparently didn't. Alliances with Caesar were temporary conveniences. Once Hoover Dam fell, once New Vegas became Rome, the great Khans would face the same choice every other tribe had faced: complete cultural annihilation or total extermination. The meeting took place in neutral territory, a ravine between Legion and Khan holdings. Vulpes Inculta had already arrived, flanked by 4 Frumentarii disguised as simple merchants. The Khans, 24 of them, armed with firearms and chem-addled bravado, looked at the Legion representatives with the wariness of dogs who'd been kicked too often. "Caesar offers alliance," Vulpes began, his voice carrying that peculiar blend of courtesy and threat that characterized all Frumentarii negotiations. "Your warriors join our assault on Hoover Dam. In exchange, you receive territory, protection, and the gratitude of the son of Mars." Papa Khan, the tribe's aging leader, spat into the dust. "Gratitude don't mean much from a man who crucifies his enemies. We've heard what happened to the Twisted Hares, to the Hydebarks, to every other tribe that got too close to your legion." Alexis watched Vulpes' expression remain perfectly neutral. The Frumentarii had probably anticipated this objection, had probably already formulated 17 responses calibrated to different levels of resistance. This was what separated Vulpes from line centurions like Alexis: the patience for psychological manipulation, the willingness to lie convincingly while planning eventual betrayal. "The Twisted Hares served the Legion during our Arizona campaigns," Vulpes explained smoothly. "They were exemplary scouts, but when those campaigns ended, when their usefulness concluded..." He paused, letting implications hang heavy as noose rope. "Caesar values loyalty, but loyalty must be absolute. The Twisted Hares' Ulysses questioned orders. His people paid the price. Their malcontents decorate Interstate 40 still. What Vulpes didn't mention was that Ulysses had been one of the legion's most effective operatives before his tribe's crucifixion drove him to abandon Caesar entirely, that the twisted hairs had been destroyed not for disloyalty, but as an object lesson in what happened when anyone, even valued servants, developed independent thought. Papa Khan's jaw tightened. And after Hoover Dam? After we've bled for your Caesar? What then? Then you'll have proven yourself worthy, Vulpes replied. Unlike the savages we've conquered, you'll have chosen alliance over subjugation. Caesar respects strength. Show him yours. The lie was so smoothly delivered that Alexis almost believed it himself. But he'd seen the reports, knew the truth. Every tribe that allied with the Legion eventually faced the same fate, assimilation or annihilation. The Whitelegs in Utah were learning this now, promised Legion support in exchange for destroying Joshua Graham, only to discover that Caesar's promises evaporated once their usefulness expired. The negotiation continued for another hour, Vulpes deploying arguments like a surgeon wielding scalpels, cutting away objections until Papa Khan had no choice but to see Caesar's offer as the least terrible option available. Finally, reluctantly, the Khans agreed to consider the alliance. As they departed, Alexis walked beside Vulpes back toward Cottonwood Cove. They'll betray us, the centurion observed quietly. The Khans are chem-addicted raiders. They lack discipline. Probably, Vulpes agreed, unconcerned. But they'll serve long enough to die at Hoover Dam, drawing NCR fire that would otherwise kill valuable legionaries. And if they don't betray us, well, 6 months after Vegas falls, we'll manufacture a reason to crucify their leadership and enslave their people. Either way, the Great Khan cease to exist as an independent entity. That's the only outcome that matters. This was Legion's strategy distilled to its essence. Total warfare, complete cultural annihilation. Every tribe, every settlement, every vestige of pre-Caesar identity ground to powder and reformed in the shape of Mars's will. 87 tribes conquered, hundreds of thousands enslaved. Millions living under Legion rule in Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, territories so thoroughly pacified that traders could travel alone without fear of raiders because the Legion had exterminated or absorbed every raider gang in 1,000 miles. At Fortification Hill, Caesar addressed his assembled centurions in the arena where so many had fought, bled, and died. 200 centurions, commanders of the Legion's 42 active centuriae, stood in perfect ranks as their god-king spoke. "The bull confronts the bear," Caesar announced, his voice projecting across the assembled warriors with the certainty of scripture. "Our standard," he gestured to the massive red banner behind him, its golden bull gleaming in afternoon sun, "represents strength, virility, unstoppable force. The NCR's bear symbolizes their weakness, a scavenger animal, living off the corpse of the old world, consuming without creating." The centurions remained silent, but Caesar could read their anticipation like words on a page. They'd been bred for this moment, trained from childhood to view conquest as sacred duty, to understand that their individual lives meant nothing compared to the Legion's eternal mission. "When we cross the Colorado," Caesar continued, "you will employ the protocols we've refined over 87 conquests. Total war, no half measures, no mercy for those who resist. Settlements that surrender immediately will be absorbed. Males under 10 conscripted for training, breeding age females distributed according to genetic optimization, the rest enslaved for labor. Those who resist," he smiled without warmth, "crucifixion, public, prolonged. Let them hang beside the roads as warnings to other profligates." Centurion Dead Sea stepped forward. "And the NCR regulars, Caesar, they won't surrender like tribal savages. They have artillery, air support, superior numbers." "They have technology," Caesar corrected. "But technology without will is useless. Your recruits will absorb their bullets. Your primes will wade through their defenses. Your veterans will crush whatever remains. Yes, we'll lose hundreds, perhaps thousands, in the initial assault. That's acceptable. The Legion replaces losses faster than the bear can. Every settlement we conquer provides fresh recruits. Every NCR position we overrun yields weapons for redistribution. And when their soldiers see crucified comrades lining Highway 95, when they understand that surrender means slavery and resistance means agony, their morale will shatter." This was the calculus of Legion warfare. Recruits were expendable, young boys torn from conquered tribes, given crude weapons, and hurled at enemy positions to exhaust ammunition and expose defenses. the three-wave system that Legate Graham had pioneered: recruits first, primes second, veterans third. Each wave wore down the enemy until superior legion discipline overwhelmed NCR firepower. Lanius had refined the system after Graham's failure. Rather than rigidly separating waves, the new doctrine allowed contubernia to operate more independently. 8-man units, moving with tactical flexibility, supported by their centurion's strategic oversight, while still maintaining the grinding attrition that made the legion so terrifyingly effective. "One final matter," Caesar said, his expression hardening. "Medical procedures. Some centurions have been permitting their men to use profligate chems, Stimpaks, Medex, Radaway. This stops immediately." The assembled centurions shifted uncomfortably. Everyone knew that healing powder and bitter drink were inferior to pre-war medicine, but Caesar's prohibition wasn't about effectiveness, it was about philosophy. "The legion succeeds because we embrace suffering," Caesar explained. "A legionary who relies on Stimpaks becomes dependent, weak, unable to function when those crutches disappear. A legionary who learns to fight through pain, who survives wounds through sheer determination, becomes a veteran worthy of Mars's favor. Yes, more recruits die without advanced medicine. Good. The weak winnow themselves out, leaving only the strong." There was brutal logic to it, Alexis reflected. The Legion did produce phenomenal warriors, legionaries who could run faster than NCR troops, absorb punishment that would cripple profligates, fight with fanatical determination born from childhood indoctrination. But the cost? Thousands of boys dead from infections that Stimpaks could have cured. Thousands more crippled from injuries that Medex and proper surgical technique could have treated. Not that Caesar cared about cost. He measured success in conquered territories, not individual lives. "Dismissed," Caesar ordered. "Prepare your centuria. We cross the Colorado in 48 days. Ave, Mars." "Ave, Caesar!" 200 voices responded in perfect unison. As the centurions dispersed, Praetorian Cursor, his hands still healing from the trial that had earned his position, approached Caesar's tent. His new assignment was bodyguard duty during Caesar's daily inspection of the weather monitoring station, the old building that housed equipment from the pre-war era. What neither Cursor nor Caesar knew was that beneath that station lay Mr. House's secret bunker, packed with dormant securitrons waiting for the platinum chip to activate them. The Legion walked over their potential doom daily, oblivious to the technological arsenal literally under their feet. Inside the tent, Caesar dismissed his Praetorians except for Lucius and reviewed medical reports from Legion Surgeon Cato. The numbers were grimmer than he'd admit publicly. 37% casualty rates among recruits during routine training, 51% among those who survived to see actual combat. The Legion churned through human bodies like a thresher through wheat, but the demographics favored Caesar. Every conquered tribe provided fresh recruitment pools. Every year, another generation of boys reached fighting age, boys who'd never known anything except Legion indoctrination, who believed with religious certainty that Caesar was Mars's son, that dying for the Legion was the highest possible honor. The NCR, meanwhile, struggled with volunteer shortages, with citizens increasingly unwilling to die for Hoover Dam and a war most Californians barely understood. Caesar's intelligence networks, Vulpes' Frumentarii mostly, reported growing dissent in NCR territories, corruption in their government, Brahmin barons manipulating policy for personal profit. Democracy was weakness, Caesar reflected. It fragmented purpose, allowed individual desires to override collective need. His legion suffered no such division. Every legionary knew his purpose: obey Caesar, crush the profligates, expand the legion until all humanity unified under Mars's eternal law. A sudden spike of pain lanced through Caesar's skull, the tumor asserting itself. He'd kept it, secret from everyone except his personal physician, a captured follower who operated the autodoc in Caesar's private quarters. The irony wasn't lost on Caesar. He who banned advanced medicine relied on pre-war surgical technology to manage his own condition. But Caesar was different. He wasn't a mere legionary. He was the son of Mars, the living embodiment of the legion's purpose. If he required technology to survive long enough to transform the legion from nomadic army to permanent empire, then technology served its proper purpose, extending the life of one superior individual rather than preserving weak masses. At the Legion raid camp near Helios I, Centurion Gaius Magnus oversaw the crucifixion of 17 NCR prisoners captured during a skirmish at El Dorado substation. The prisoners, mostly young troopers, none older than 25, were nailed to crosses methodically, professionally. Legion carpenters had perfected the technique over thousands of repetitions. Nails through the wrists, not the palms, which would tear free. Positioned to maximize suffering while preventing rapid death from blood loss, the crosses would line Highway 95, visible to every traveler between New Vegas and NCR territory. The message was clear. This is what happens to those who oppose Caesar. One prisoner, a female ranger, unusual, given NCR's general reluctance to deploy women in combat roles, spat blood at Gaius as the nails went through her wrists. "The bear will crush you," she gasped. "When we retake Vegas—" "You won't," Gaius interrupted calmly, examining his thermic lance, while carpenters secured her cross. "The NCR is overstretched, undermanned, and morally exhausted. Your government in Shady Sands barely cares about this war. Your soldiers know they're dying for politicians' egos, not for any meaningful cause. Meanwhile, my legionaries would throw themselves into fire if Caesar commanded it. That's the difference between democracy and devotion." The ranger's response was lost in screaming as the cross was raised vertical and dropped into its hole. The impact drove nails deeper, tore flesh, sent waves of agony radiating through her body. She'd last 3 days, maybe 4. Long enough for dozens of traders, travelers, and NCR scouts to see her, to understand viscerally what Legion conquest meant. This was psychological warfare at its most effective. The crucifixions didn't just eliminate enemies, they paralyzed entire communities with terror. Settlements that might have resisted instead surrendered immediately, hoping that submission would earn mercy. It rarely did. The Legion's appetite for conquest was infinite, and every surrender simply accelerated the pace of expansion. 40 miles west, at Camp McCarran, the NCR's main base near New Vegas, a Legion Frumentarii named Curtis, operating under the alias Picus, filed routine supply reports while secretly noting troop movements, shift changes, and defensive weaknesses. He'd maintained his cover for 3 years, working as a logistics officer, earning trust through competence and careful mediocrity. When the Legion attacked Hoover Dam, Curtis would sabotage ammunition supplies, reroute reinforcements, and generally ensure that NCR's response was delayed, confused, and ineffective. Then he'd disappear, returning to the Legion with intelligence that would help Caesar plan the occupation of New Vegas itself. This was Frumentarii work at its most patient, not the dramatic terror of Nipton or Camp Searchlight, but slow infiltration, building networks of informants and collaborators who either believed in the Legion's cause or simply wanted to survive its conquest. As sunset painted Fortification Hill in shades of blood and gold, Vexillarius Picus stood on the western ridge, holding high the Legion standard. The massive banner, red cloth with its golden bull, caught the wind, visible for miles. Every legionary who saw it felt the same surge of certainty. They were not individuals, not separate beings with personal desires. They were components of something larger, an unstoppable force destined to sweep aside the corrupt democracy of the Bear and establish Mars's perfect order. Below, in the training yards, the newest generation of recruits drilled endlessly. 8-man contubernium moving in flawless coordination, 80-man centuriae responding instantly to their centurion's commands, the machine perpetuating itself, grinding tribal identities into Legion uniformity, transforming children into weapons through brutality and indoctrination. In 48 days, this machine would be unleashed on Hoover Dam. 5,000 combat-ready legionaries would cross the Colorado, supported by Frumentarii sabotage, Great Khan harassment, and the Omerta's promised uprising on the Strip. The NCR, weakened by political infighting and overextension, would crumble. New Vegas would become Rome, and Caesar's transformation from tribal warlord to genuine emperor would be complete. Or so the plan went. What Caesar couldn't know, was that a courier shot in the head and left for dead was even now waking in Doc Mitchell's clinic in Goodsprings. That this courier would prove to be the variable that shattered all predictions, the human element that no amount of Legion discipline could account for. But that was still to come. For now, the Legion ground forward with mechanical inevitability, recruiting, training, crucifying, conquering. 87 tribes erased from history, hundreds of thousands enslaved, an entire civilization remade in the image of one man's vision of ancient Rome, filtered through post-apocalyptic desperation. The bull confronted the bear, and the wasteland prepared to drown in blood.